We continue in song on page 66 with the words that say, asking God that our worship be acceptable.
This Amish mother and her daughter had for the first time ventured into the modern world. They happened to be, for some unknown reason, at a mall. And they noticed there was this thing with two big steel doors that seemed to open and close. And they didn't know what it was. So they stood there for a while staring at it. And suddenly it opened, and there was this older man with a walker who shuffled his way in, and the doors closed. And they watched. And a couple of minutes later, the doors opened, and this young, handsome man walked out. And the mother looked at her daughter and said, "Darling, go find your father." It would be nice if change were that simple, but it isn't. It's never easy. As we age, I've certainly noticed, our habits become more entrenched and more difficult to change. Much of the world certainly has changed around us. Now, even though we haven't lived all this time and we take certain things for granted, in the last 600 years, three major things have totally changed almost every aspect of life: the printing press, the automobile, and now the technological revolution. It has all three of them, but the technology is constantly changing the way we function, not just in our personal lives, but in society, in the ways that we are working with each other. But there are some things that never change. There are some things that are true always, and always will be true. Human beings, first and foremost, need each other. We need relationship. We need connection. No matter what changes around us, ultimately at our core, we know that that's the essence of who we are. We must connect with each other. Human companionship is at the core of our being. Rabbi Richard Plavin was writing about his summer travels, and for some reason, he happened to stumble on a number of strange museums. Some of you may have seen, wherever you go, some places there are these little strange museums. So he happened to list a few of them. One of them is called the British Lawnmower Museum. I don't know if you've ever been there. I haven't. The Museum of Toilets. The Banana Museum. These are not made up. These actually exist. The Devil's Rope Museum, which is actually a museum about rope, the history of rope. That reminded me of a time in Italy when Avi and I were at a museum called the Museum of Torture. We went through it. Joni couldn't stomach the exhibits, so she stayed outside. But there's one museum I wanted to share with you that Rabbi Plavin talked about in Zagreb, Croatia. It's called the Museum of Broken Relationships. It sounds like a joke. It isn't. It's a real place. Now, what happens is the curators ask disappointed lovers to donate an object that has meaning to them about the relationship that broke up, and that to tell them the story behind the object. So let me give you a few examples. One, there's a can of love incense with a 2-word explanation: doesn't work. There's a garden dwarf thrown at a husband's car. There's an iron used to press a wedding suit. There's a shaving kit bought as a birthday present. One Turkish woman donated a champagne bottle which had not been opened because she thought they should pop it on their first anniversary of their relationship when he proposed. Instead, he walked away, and the bottle remains full. There's another exhibit that was perhaps the most touching. In a Zagreb hospital, I met a beautiful young and ambitious social worker from the Ministry of Defense, it read. Now, this note is displayed next to a prosthetic leg. The note goes on to read, "This, the leg, has endured longer than our love. It was made of sturdier material. Now, Rosh Hashanah offers us a yearly chance to reevaluate our relationships. We get to spend some time in synagogue with familiar prayers and music, faces that we don't see that often, but we have time. And part of what we should be doing is thinking about our connections, about our relationships, about our families, about the people we care about who are important to us. We have to ask ourselves some questions. Are some of these people we need and depend upon going to become stories in our own personal museum of broken relationships? Can I spend time trying to strengthen the bonds and cherish those people that I might not have been focusing on? Am I willing to change my habits and patterns and do what's necessary in my life in order to build up and strengthen these relationships? This past year, one of our young women who grew up here as a young girl, Jackie Packer, who is a chef and an entrepreneur, Jackie went on a walkabout, they call it in Australia. She went traveling to find recipes and experiences, and she found both. She also wrote a blog, and I was privileged to be able to be one of the readers. I want to read you something from her April 15th blog in India. Jackie writes, I met a naked Baba, holy man, the other day. He's a young guy, about 28 or 29, and quite good looking. He wanders about Rishikesh, the city north of Delhi, with bare feet and a wrap barely covering him up. His head is covered, he has the third eye markings on his forehead, and he lives in a cave. His guru found him at 9 years old, and Babaji, as we called him, began following the guru from that day on. This would not go well in the States, and I'm pretty sure the guru would be in jail right now, she writes. Probably true. Since meeting his guru, he has cut all ties with his family. He ran into them a few years back, and his own parents didn't recognize him. When I questioned how hard it must have been to lose his whole family, he referred to it as a freedom, not having a family to run back to. This sent my mind into a tailspin, Jackie wrote. Is my family tying me down? Am I better off on my own? No and no, she said. I could not imagine not having to run back to Miami for special events or just a hug. If losing that is considered freedom, I don't want it. I like to be missed. I like having people to miss. That's what fills your heart at the end of the day. To think there is no one out there waiting for him to go back home is heartbreaking. I look at this wise, holy man, and all I see is a lost soul looking for what I already have. How many of us already have those wonderful relationships? And how much effort are we putting into them? The symbol of the New Year of Rosh Hashanah is the shofar. It is not the blowing of the shofar that's the mitzvah, it's the hearing. Hearing is essential. In fact, hearing is one of our most important senses. The shofar is not meant to speak to us. It's meant to be our soul. It's meant to be the sound of our soul, the pure cry, the raw sound of what a human soul is when it needs, when it wants, when it longs. It's a sound. It isn't the words, it is the sound. The Maggid of Mezerich made a parable about the shofar. He said there was a king who had his only son, and he sent his son away to a distant province. And the son, over time, forgot the native language of his father and began learning the new language of the province. One day, the king decided to journey to that very province. And when he came, the son began shouting out to his father, but his father didn't understand, because his father didn't understand that language. And the son, realizing his father was not responding to him, began to cry and moan and call out in pure agony and desire for his father. And his father heard that and recognized his son. The Maggid said that's what the shofar is meant to be, for us to respond, to hear in our soul that longing, and so to pay attention to it. Scientists say that our hearing is 10 times as acute as our sense of vision. Hearing is like an alarm system for us. In fact, we even hear when we sleep. There are different levels of hearing. One is that kind of sudden sound, spontaneous, that startles us. And another one is when you're across a room and someone calls your name. Even with all the noise, you hear it. Or if you're on Lincoln Road and someone drops some coins and you turn around and you hear that sound, even with all the noise around. But the most sophisticated sound we have is the sounds we hear when we're paying attention, when we're focusing, when we're actually thinking about the sounds around us. Our brain is working to hear all of the sounds that we want to hear. It's almost as if we have those earphones on and we're muffling everything else out and we're focusing on what is important to us. That's what the shofar is asking us to do, to focus on our soul and what we need, who we are related to, who we are connected to, and who we are not, and who we want to be, or who we want to deepen our connection to, and why we're not changing and doing it. Rosh Hashanah is, in fact, the anniversary of the creation of the soul of human beings, not of the world. It's the 6th day that we mark on this day. It's the day human beings had the soul breathed into them, and we became in relationship with each other. Man and woman, human beings, connected to each other. That's what we celebrate on this day. Our relationships, our connectedness. If you want to see a snapshot of what the pure relationship is, go and stand at an airport and watch people coming off the plane or people leaving. In fact, you and I have done that many times in our own lives. And if you want to see it, you can go to the film Love Actually, where they actually shot about 60 seconds of film at the end was taken at Heathrow of real people leaving and people coming. And you watch it, and it's so intense because it's so real, and because you and I have been there, because we remember what it is to welcome home someone after so long, or to have to leave someone that you don't want to leave, and the pain of that moment. The Jewish New Year, the Rosh Hashanah, reminds us also of those whom we can no longer embrace. Many years ago, I told a story, and I've remembered it always, and it just reoccurred to me. This is a story of Coach Bear Bryant, the University of Alabama. He was such an important figure that they used to use him for commercials, and in this phone company commercial, he read the script as he was supposed to. He turned to the camera, and these are the words that he had memorized. "You know," he said, "we keep the boys pretty busy." He meant the football team, if you didn't know. "We keep the boys pretty busy, but they always have time to pick up the phone and call. It's real important to keep in touch. Have you called your mama today?" And then at that moment, his eyes welled up spontaneously, and tears began to flow. And he looked at the camera, and he improvised a sentence. He said, "I wish I could call my mama still." It's one of the most touching moments that's ever captured on film. But think about those people we still can call and touch. And think of all those people we can still get closer to and haven't been working on. We say on this day, Salach lanu, forgive us. Machal lanu, pardon us. kaper lanu, grant us atonement. You know, there are words, I know, there are words that I'm really good at saying, and there are words I just can't say in my life. You probably have them as well. I'm really good at saying I am sorry. I've probably said it to many of you over the years, because I am, and I can say that. But I have trouble saying I am wrong. I do. I have trouble saying that. I can say you are right. I just can't say I am wrong, you know. I don't know why. There are some people that have trouble saying I love you. There are some people that find words of praise hard to say and very hard to come out with. But the issue of being wrong and saying it, and the issue of sharing ourselves with each other, is at the core of what this is all about this new year. There's this wonderful poem that I love from Yehuda Amichai, the Israeli poet. It's very simple. It's called From the Place Where We Are Right. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined temple in Jerusalem once stood. In the place where I am right, nothing grows. Intellectually, I get that, but emotionally, I just find it hard to adjust my behavior. I do, and you do too, and you know that. There are things you find it hard to say that you should say. I try every year to pay attention to the shofar blast. I try to deepen my relationships, and I succeed in part, but not enough. So each year, I try again. Each of us gets that opportunity. That's what we're here for, to try again. Not just to hear what I'm saying, but to think about our lives and to make a difference this year, to do something more. You know, I read this essay this year. It just shocked me. It was about a man I'd never heard of before, and I couldn't believe that this powerful influence on my life and all of our lives I had never heard of. His name was Dr. Maurice Hilleman. Some of you may know him. I had never heard of him before. Why should we know him? He is responsible for 8 of the 14 vaccines that are routinely recommended for our children. He is, according to scientific historians, the scientist that has saved more lives than any other scientist in the entire 20th century. He saved our children's lives, our lives, by finding ways to detect these terrible diseases and immunize us. 8 of the 14 are his. Measles, mumps, hepatitis A and B, chickenpox, meningitis, pneumonia, rubella, and I've never heard of him. But when I read his story, what touched me most is how he became a doctor. He believed that his future lay at J.C. Penney's to be in sales. That's where he started. But he had an older brother. And his older brother he respected and loved. And his older brother saw something in Maurice, something greater than working at J.C. Penney's. And he convinced him, against his own better judgment, he convinced Maurice to go to college. And there college began a journey for him that took him to solving all of these dilemmas that made our children healthier and all of us healthier. And children throughout the world benefit from that brother's insistence. That relationship changed everything. I was thinking about that because I read also recently about one of our young men who grew up here, Dr. David Weinstein. Some of you may remember David when he grew up here. He's Alan and Patty's son. And David is now at the University of Florida as a pediatrician. He just received a great award called the Order of the Smile Award. He shares that with Pope John Paul II, Nelson Mandela, and Oprah Winfrey. It's a big deal. Now, how did he get this award? He got it because when he was in medical school and then at Harvard, he saw a child and a family suffering from a rare disease. Now, this disease is called glycogen storage disease, GSD. Many doctors don't even know what it is. In fact, David goes around teaching doctors how to detect it. It's very rare. It occurs in 1 in 100,000 births. But he saw this family, and instead of just treating the family and moving on, something about that relationship so touched him, so touched his soul, that he has devoted his medical career to working with every family he can find around the world. He's worked in dozens and dozens of countries with these families, keeping these children alive and helping these families cope with this difficult disease. It started with one relationship, and it ends up touching thousands all over the world. And it may end up in finding a real cure at some point. I'm always amazed at how our relationships can change what we do. When we are touched by others, we're able to touch in return. I want to share one more story with you from Rabbi Bob Albert. Some of you know he's a comedian. He just wrote a book called Thanks, I Needed That. Tells a story about this survivor from the Holocaust that he witnessed. His name is Izzy Rosenzweig. Izzy lost 2 sisters in the Holocaust, and he could never speak about them. It was too painful. He could never tell his own children about his sisters. They knew they had lived, they knew they had died, but they never knew the stories. And he had it so difficult because that pain just wouldn't allow him to talk about it. Now, it happened that his son got married, and they were having twin daughters. For him, for Izzy, twin granddaughters. And they made the decision to name the girls after the 2 sisters that had been killed in the Holocaust. And Izzy was just so touched that the floodgates opened, and he was able to talk for the first time in his life about his sisters. And he could talk about them, talk about who they were, what kinds of women they could have become, how he loved them. And he told the stories. But then Bob Alpert describes this moment. After the ceremony, everyone went into the living room, and they started to schmooze and nosh. And he says, so this is what I saw through the chatting people sitting and standing in that crowded living room. This is what I saw in the background. A dining room, overhead lights out, the space dimly illuminated by the glow from the adjoining kitchen, a playpen with 2 sleeping infants, and Izzy Rosenzweig alone, leaning forward, looking down silently, watching the babies. His forearm lay on the rail, and his chin rested on that arm as he stared below at the infants. With his other hand, he reached down gently, and with the weight of a feather, caressed their soft, tiny heads. Words matter. Deeds matter. Relationships matter. For us, for the world. Paying attention can make all the difference in our lives and the lives of those we need and love. 5774. Let's try a little harder. Let's take a look a little deeper into our souls. Let's try and respond a little more to the shofar blast we'll hear tomorrow and on Friday. You know, one of our religious school teachers asked one of the children in teaching about the high holidays, what does a person have to do in order to repent? And the child said, sin. It wasn't the answer the teacher expected, but it was the right answer. So, what do we need to do to deepen our relationships? We have to first recognize that they need to be deepened, that we need to pay more attention, that we need to listen to the sound of our soul when the shofar blows, and to look around and see what is precious to us. Only then can we turn and make teshuvah, make this turnaround in our lives. Let the depth of the raw sounds of the shofar penetrate our hearts, and may all of us find a way to admit that we must and to repair what we can. L'shana tova tikatevu, may this be a year of deepening relationships for all of us. Shana tova.